G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome to my first impressions of the Act 4 The Awakening beta for Path of Exile. Yesterday was the launch day for Path of Exile's Awakening beta, and I streamed about 18 hours of me playing the beta straight. So, I had a pretty good time. So much has changed, so much more than I would have expected out of this Act expansion pack. I expected to get some new skills, some new uniques, you know, some new Act, new bosses and stuff like that, and some new maps that came along with that. But they've really gone back and overhauled a lot of the game. Like, a huge amount of the game has changed. So I'm going to break down this first impressions into sections. I will clearly tell you guys when sections will be spoilerish. Use your own viewer discretion. Okay, so the first part I want to talk about is the overhaul to the leveling experience. Now, a lot of zone levels have changed, and a lot of zones have been removed or condensed, and waypoints have been moved. And this overall feels like a much more a dense and concentrated experience. There's a lot less fluff content, there's a lot less running through random zones that you don't really pay attention to. All of the zones are fairly noteworthy now, a lot of the ones that weren't have been removed, and overall the progression feels a lot more smooth. A lot of the changes also feel really intuitive as well. A good example is in Act 3 now. Remember how, you know, you often miss the sewers waypoint because, you know, it's off in some random extra corner, you'll get the bust, and then you'll leave and you'll forget the sewers waypoint. I'm sure we've all done this countless times. And now what happens is, when you progress through this zone, you're actually channeled past the waypoint before you get to the bust. So you're going to run into the waypoint by process of running through the zone. That sort of intuitive change has been made throughout the entire game. There's a lot of examples of that, and overall those sorts of things, those quality of life improvements, really make the leveling experience much more enjoyable. Now, because they added a new act but didn't remove a difficulty, what they did was cut out a lot of the fluff. So we're seeing things like Submerged Passage is now just the one zone, there's no upper Submerged Passage. We're seeing things like the same thing happen to the prison, just the one zone now. Chamber of Sins has had one of its levels removed. There's an entire removal of the entire Dark Forest zone here. So there's a lot less of those kind of like zones that you just ran through and didn't really pay much attention to. Another example is Lunaris has had Lunaris 2 removed, so it's now straight into Lunaris 1, straight into the Piety zone of Lunaris 3. So there's a lot of examples of that sort of like repeated zones, or fluff zones, or filler zones, or zones that you pretty much just ran through and ignored. All of those things have been removed, making the game a lot more dense. Another really good example of that density is that with the removal of Dark Forest, the Weaver's Chambers entrance has been moved to Western Forest. So now you have Alira, you have the Weaver's Chambers entrance, and you have the Way Forward quest, all in the one Western Forest zone. So that's kind of like a really exciting zone with a lot of stuff to do in it. I have to say that overall, hands down, this leveling experience change is so freaking good. The leveling experience feels really, really good. They still, I think, have a fair bit of balancing to do in Cruel and Merciless in terms of zone levels and stuff. I think they might still be adjusting some of those things, and maybe like mob life and damage totals and stuff like that. But the overall like movement of waypoints and reduction of zone sizes and simplification of zone sizes, you'll be very happy to know Solaris is simplified heavily now. So those zones are much less painful to run through. I would even hazard to say somewhat enjoyable, because it's actually a cool zone. It was just always super frustrating in layout. So overall, really impressed with the leveling experience changes. They've also done something pretty interesting with like the difficulty of the game as well. So they've rebalanced monster life and damage totals, and I'll have to say that overall monsters feel more threatening and more dangerous. But what they've also done is they've reduced the level and made flasks more early available. So flasks are now available many levels before they were available before. This means that you have access to more powerful flasks while leveling up, which, if you're very good with flasks, that makes the game easier. So the game has become more difficult, but then flasks have become much more powerful, or moved back so you have access to more powerful flasks. The effect of this is that it gives the game a much more, like, it's going to be easier the more skilled you are with your flask usage, which is the sort of changes I really like to see. So again, overall, really super freaking impressed with the leveling experience changes. Really good stuff, and it's going to make racing, it's going to make leveling new characters, and it's going to make new players who jump in and level their first character have a much more enjoyable experience as well. Sort of tied in with this change, actually, now that I think about it, is the fact that support gems and a lot of gems have been changed. Like, nearly every quest reward has been changed in some way, and a lot of cool support gems, things like faster attacks, faster casting, conk effect, LMP, GMP, all that stuff is available much earlier on. So that means when you're leveling with your skills, and the skills that you're actually able to have access to, and the modifications you can make to those skills, are now far more interesting, far more early on. So that, again, makes the game a lot more exciting. Instead of just running through with, like, split arrow, you know, just firing standard split arrows with unlinked, you know, maybe getting added lightning, and that's all you've got for, like, the first couple hours of the game, things become a lot more interesting a lot more quickly. They also did things like improving the base attack speed of a lot of weapons as well, which, again, makes the gameplay feel faster and better. So that new player experience is going to be way better than it's ever been before, and for us who have played the game a lot, it just makes things a little bit less painful and a little bit more enjoyable in those early stages. Okay, so this next part I'm going to talk about Act 4. I'm not going to go into the act and show you guys the different stuff there. What I'm going to do is upload my first playthrough of the first half of Act 4, because that's all that's in the beta at the moment, the first half of Act 4. I'll upload that separately so you guys can actually see that firsthand and see my impressions firsthand. But I just want to give like a short overview of my feelings and what I've played of Act 4 so far. So, spoiler alert, I'll be talking about some spoilers, but I won't be showing them, so I'll give it a minor spoiler alert warning there. So, here is the map, what we have so far. It looks like it's most of the act, but this is actually, Chris said this is 4 of the major bosses of 9. There's 5 more to be added. Now, I can pinpoint 3 of what the major bosses are. I'm a little bit unsure of which Chris means by the 4th one. There's a couple bosses that could, like, couple unique mobs that could count as the major boss. So the 3 major bosses are Vol, here in the Dried Lake. There is Duresso in the Grand Arena, and then Kaom in Kaom's Stronghold here. So when you get to the Crystal Veins, you fight through these creepy-ass mines, and then you meet with Diala, and she tells you, she gives you the choice of going off to fight Kaom or Duresso. And the Kaom zones are, lava. The actual Kaom fight is pretty cool. You guys who aren't worried about spoilers have probably already seen that fight. It's fast, it's furious, it's intense. In normal difficulty, it was fairly easy, but in Cruel, it got pretty damn hectic, and I think in Merciless, it's going to be absolutely brutal. Taking a Ruby Flask at the very least is the least you can do, but it is fiery, and it is very, very scary and dangerous. So it looked a bit simple and boring in the teaser video that ZiggyD showed off before the beta came up, but I think it's actually much more intense and fast-paced when you actually play that fight. So that was pretty cool. But the real star of Act 4 for me, guys, was this side, Duresso's Dream and the Grand Arena. This is my favorite. These 2 things here, these are my favorite zones in the entire game. This is such like a new awesome experience, so atmospheric, man. I got nerd chills the entire time as I was walking through here. So essentially you get funneled through this kind of like, these pit fighter pits, and you go through these different sections and they like open up stuff and there's things attacking you, and this is kind of like Duresso recounting his early history as a fighter, as a gladiator, growing up in the pits as a small child, growing into a man, and you're kind of like walking in his footsteps essentially, fighting these different enemies, and that's really kind of like really sets the scene, really gets you to know Duresso. And then there's this really particularly intense fight that I think might be the 4th boss. There's this unique mob that you have to kill, and it's constantly spawning mobs in this zone here, in this one sort of section. So in this section, as you're fighting the guy, more and more mobs are spawning, and it's getting fuller and fuller and fuller. The mobs are actually randomized between the different mobs where you can get, so each time you go through it could be a different mob. And I actually got pretty unlucky the first time, and they were all champs. So I was fighting a pack of about 100 to 200 champs in the one zone. It was like a huge, massive pack of these champ dogs, along with fighting this guy. It was absolutely insane. So I managed to make it through that. You have to kill the guy to stop the spawns from happening, and that was a pretty intense and exciting fight. I think they might be changing that fact that they can spawn as champs, because that's pretty unfortunate and broken. Like that can be death and hardcore, that's for sure. But then, the real highlight, though, is when you go into the actual Grand Arena. So after passing through the Duresso's Dream, you go into the Grand Arena and you walk through, and Duresso recounts some of his tale. And as you step out into this arena and you hear the cheers of the crowd and you see the falling pebbles, and there's the open, wide gladiatorial arena with the sands there with blood spilt on them, and then there's all the like dogs and stuff jumping out of pits, and it's just like, I just, like, I had to, like, do fat laps of the arena, like, hand up in the air. Is there no one else? Are you not entertained? It was just so freaking atmospheric the entire time, as I said, nerd chills, such a cool zone, such a cool experience, really freaking immersive. Absolutely loved it, absolutely loved it. So, that's obviously, like, my highlight of Act 4, and that is insane. I really hope they make, like, an endgame map based on that plays like that. At least a unique map would be awesome based on that zone. I really hope we see some of that. Overall, like, I quite liked the entirety of Act 4. They really stepped it up a notch. You know, from the moment you enter it, the aqueducts is like something else. It is such a, like, an intense, like, really atmospheric, cool zone. Compared to something like City of San or the Jungle when you first enter these acts, the aqueduct really sets the scene of how, like, top-notch, the real design, you know, taking it to the next level that ZiggyD have done with this. Overall, I think I like pretty much everything. The mines are creepy and uncomfortable and claustrophobic, which I think is the intention. But I don't know if I enjoyed them. Maybe you're not supposed to enjoy them. I don't think I'm entirely happy with the mines section, but everything else I absolutely loved. Absolutely loved it, guys. Insane stuff. Alright guys, so now I want to go over a couple of the skill and mechanics changes. I'm going to talk a little bit about shotgunning, I'm going to talk a little bit about Cascade and how it was changed. I'll also talk a little bit about Eldritch Battery as well, and I'll probably also talk about the Golem. So I'll go over each of those different things. Basically some of the things that I've encountered that have changed or been added to the game with my spellcaster that I've been leveling. So I came into this character intending to test some of the shotgunning changes and Eldritch Battery change, and I also found out a few other cool things as well. So, the first one, let's go over the shotgunning change. For those of you guys, to, like, just fully clarify this, because there's a lot of confusion about shotgunning, the shotgunning change is intended to bring spells in line with attacks. I've talked to the devs a ton of times in the past, and whenever it was talking about projectile spells, or, uniques and things that interact with projectiles, the shotgunning mechanic was always a huge balancing concern, very restrictive, and it stopped them from even implementing a lot of skills that they wanted to implement. So, this is designed to remove that issue. They've just decided to sort of cut it entirely out, bring everything to be equal so that now, you know, attacks don't shotgun, the same as spells don't shotgun as well. So, now, what shotgunning shotgunning is when you fire multiple projectiles. Say you're firing 3 fireballs. If you were standing in point blank, so let's say there was an enemy standing just here, you fired 3 fireballs, all the fireballs would hit the same enemy, dealing, you know, 3 times the projectile damage, essentially. You're dealing the projectile damage 3 times, each one of them are hitting. Now, that no longer happens. If you fire 3 fireballs at an enemy at point blank, 1 will hit and the other 2 will pass through or past the enemy. Now, in line with this change, they have rebalanced a lot of the numbers, damage of actual spells. They've reduced the penalties on lesser multiple and greater multiple projectiles and made those support gems available more early as well. So I tested this a lot with Freeze Pulse, and I think for the leveling experience, what it felt like was that LMP was no longer mandatory for leveling. Like, generally, the first support gem you'd really want to get going on Freeze Pulse would be lesser multiple projectiles, because not only was it an increase in actual single target damage, but it was also an increase in AoE damage as well. You increased your actual AoE, so you had your better spread if you needed it, but you also were able to overlap all of the Freeze Pulses, dealing, you know, 3 times the damage. Even, you know, when you had the damage penalty, it still worked out to be a lot more damage for single targets. So LMP was basically mandatory, and endgame GMP became mandatory. Now, I think with this change that at endgame you still want lesser multiple projectiles, because you still want that AoE. Like, running around without lesser multiple projectiles, it just isn't enough. Even with projectile speed, you still have a very narrow field, and unlike something like Cascade, where AoE can increase the width slightly, it ends up being, you know, not quite as good. Now, maybe with enough projectile speed, if you don't mind kind of like the narrowness of Cascade, then you might also be able to get away with the sort of the non-multiple projectile Freeze Pulse. Now, I think that overall, this is the sense that I'm getting from the skills I've tested so far and a lot of the other skills I've seen people testing, is that it's going to take them a fair bit of time in the beta to get the numbers right. There's going to be a lot of balancing of the actual damage numbers of spells, because they essentially wiped out something that was a super powerful mechanic for a lot of spells. Their intention wasn't to make these spells crap. They want these spells to still be good and usable. So what this means now is that they have to go back and rebalance the numbers of the spells, they have to balance the numbers of the support gems the spells can use, and they have to sort of, you know, maybe even rethink the mechanics on some spells as well. For example, Flame Totem now gets additional projectiles while leveling. Maybe more spells can incorporate things like that to help them with AoE without making it mandatory to use something like lesser multiple or greater multiple projectiles. Now, a specific thing, and this is feedback I'm sending to the devs, is that I think in light of these changes, in light of the removal of shotgun, things that were really good about spells, like the fact that freeze pulse with LMP, if I put this in here, you can see this overlaps really, really well. Like, it barely increases the width of freeze pulse when I add an LMP. It's because they stack up almost perfectly. Now, this was great when you were shotgunning, because it meant it was really easy to shotgun with the entirety of all of your greater multiple projectiles. Now, that is not good anymore, because you're not doing any additional damage when you're stacking up 3 projectiles anymore. You're doing the same amount of damage as with 1 projectile, just with less AoE. So this means when you're playing with Freeze Pulse, you need to kind of aim like this, you know, just in front of your character, regardless of where the enemy is, and that's awkward and it's not fun. So the feedback I'm going to send the devs is to, with things like this, with cases like this, where projectiles overlap really well, now that shotgunning isn't a thing, I would like to see the devs force fanning out of the projectiles. So I'd like to see that, even if I aimed out here, I'd like to see the fanning on Freeze Pulse look a little something like this, regardless of where I aimed. I'd like you to still be able to fan it out further if you aimed closer to your character, but tighten up, you know, like loosen up that fanning range. Make it so that they only just overlap or that they don't actually overlap at all. If you're gonna allow us to use LMP and if you're gonna remove shotgunning, then stop projectiles from overlapping so much. There's no reason for them to. So as I said, guys, there's going to be a lot of fine-tuning and balancing of the numbers. Now, try not to stress about your skills being dead now, or your builds being dead with the shotgunning removal. It's going to take them, I think, a fair bit of time in the beta to get these things right. If you are in the beta, make sure you do provide that feedback on how the damage of your gems feel, though do keep an open mind and try some different support gems where you might have used LMP or GMP before. Now, the next change I'd like to point out is a change to Glacial Cascade. Guys, it's actually playable now. This was like one of the main things that frustrated me with Glacial Cascade, is that every single little pebble and ledge blocked it. Now Cascade travels pretty much through everything that's not a hard block. So if something is an actual wall, then Cascade will stop on it, you know, as per most projectile attacks. Now, I know Cascade is not a projectile, but it travels through things, it travels over gaps, and it just makes the whole skill so much more enjoyable to play. Such a good change. So, you know, Cascade can now travel past things like this, it can travel up and down ledges, it can travel over doodads that, you know, would usually block it. Fantastic change. So guys, if you're a big fan of Cascade, then the skill is so much more playable now. The unfortunate thing is that I was really hoping that when I found this out, that I found that Cascade was fixed. I was hoping that Arctic Breath was the same, but unfortunately, as you can tell, Arctic Breath is still not the same. It is still blocked by every little pebble and doodad that you might run across. So Arctic Breath is still, in my mind, unplayable. Though I did talk to Rory and he said that changes are coming for Arctic Breath, so hopefully it should be changed to act like Cascade as well, and should be a lot more playable. So these sort of quality life improvements are the things that make skills actually fun to play, over being almost unviably fun, you know, unfun to play. Alright, the next thing I want to cover is my first impressions of the Chaos Golem. I haven't tried the other Golems, but I'm a fan of the Chaos Golem. He is a bro. He is a little bit crazy. You notice that as we sit here and talk, he is very, very impatient, and he basically just constantly breakdances. I mean, it's kind of cute at first, so I think maybe that might become annoying later. His AI is a little bit crazy, but the actual Chaos Golem here is incredible. He's very tanky to start off with, and then if you have the gem slots for it, if you chuck on things like minion life and minion totem elemental resistance, he basically never dies. But he will occasionally die for me because I don't have any healing for him. He doesn't have any regen or anything like that. But if you got life leech going, or if you were running vitality or something like that, or if you had another way to heal mobs like a minion recovery flask, then it's basically never going to die. He's super tanky. I also like the mechanics of his attacks as well, though I think it's a bit unfortunate that he tends to hang a little bit too far at range. I'd like to see his AI get more close into combat. My overall impressions of the Golems, from what I've seen so far, you know, the utility that they offer and the way that they work mechanically, is that I think Golems are going to be something that a lot of builds are going to run. A lot of regular builds are going to run. I think they're actually going to see the least used in minion builds, like in summoners. The reason is that they don't have any inherent synergy with summoners, apart from the fact that you can get an extra, you can get an extra minion out there. The actual buff that they give, like Chaos Golem gives the physical damage reduction, which is a pretty nice defensive buff, doesn't affect your minions. It only affects you personally. So the Chaos Golem might see some use on summoners just as kind of like a tanking minion to add an extra, meat shield out there to protect and also give you a little bit of extra mitigation on top of that. The Fire Golem though and the Ice Golem don't really offer that much. The Ice Golem maybe offers chilling, but the crit chance doesn't do anything for your minions, doesn't do anything for a summoner, and the damage doesn't do anything for a summoner or for your minions either. So the utility with summoners is actually lower. These are, I think, Path of Exile's mercenary system. I think this is GGG's take on the mercenary system. This is the idea is that pretty much everyone can run a friend. They can have a companion now as they run through content. They provide a minor buff, they provide some utility, and they provide, a pseudo meat shield. The aggro isn't super strong now. They changed minion aggro a bit, and it's kind of like 50-50 whether mobs attack me or the Chaos Golem. The thing is, because the Chaos Golem kind of hangs at range a little bit too much, I end up kind of like drawing aggro a little bit more than he does sometimes, but when he is up the front and when I do run behind him, he does a good job of distracting some of the mobs, as well as, absorbing a lot of that damage, absorbing the occasional attack from a boss and things like that. So overall, I feel like a really good addition. I think they're going to see a fair bit of use across a lot of different characters. The buffs, although small, are nice, and the utility that they provide, and the fact that they're pretty easy to run even without any support gems potentially. Still have to test at endgame, this is just for the leveling experience so far, but I think they will see some use. And again, I feel like it's kind of Path of Exile's take on the mercenary system, and I like it. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about is Eldritch Battery, my first impressions of it for leveling specifically. This isn't any comment on the endgame viability of Eldritch Battery. I'm trying to keep an open mind towards that. I know a lot of people don't like this change. I'm trying to keep an open mind. I'm going to do my best to test it at endgame, but I did test it for leveling. I gave it a really solid test for leveling to see whether this is a useful leveling keystone anymore. In the past, on a spellcaster, you could grab Eldritch Battery pretty early, convert your 100 or so ES that wasn't really serving much purpose defensively to something fairly useful like mana. I can pretty safely say that Eldritch Battery is essentially useless for leveling, outside of anything maybe like a totem build or maybe a summoner build. I think for most builds, like most attack builds and most spellcaster builds that are using their attacks or spells fairly frequently, even reasonably frequently, like something like Flame Blast will probably be too often, Eldritch Battery is not useful. It's not useful for leveling at all. What it does is it puts your energy shield over the top of your mana, and you use that instead of your mana. It has the same mechanics of Energy Shield in that after you stop casting spells for a while, it takes a few seconds and then it starts regenerating. It starts regenerating at the rate of your recharge rate, and there's that same recharge delay that you have on your ES. Now, if you spend any mana, or if you're running Arctic Armor or anything that damages your mana, like say Mind Over Mana, that stops it from regenerating. So those are the important mechanics there. What I did to test for leveling, and let's compare this to mana, right? Let's compare my character for mana. I picked up these nodes here. This Deep Thoughts, the mana node on the way to it, and Energy Shield and Mana Regeneration, and I ran a level 5 Clarity. Now, I also had these couple nodes here that also include some mana. So, I had 3 specific mana nodes, and then a couple ones that you usually pick up for life anyway as a Witch Spellcaster. So that's what I had mana-wise. With a level 5 Clarity, easily supporting my fully linked skills, no mana problems whatsoever. Worked perfectly, very low investment, very efficient. I tried Eldritch Battery. I wanted to see if it could be anywhere near efficient or useful for leveling. So I picked up Eldritch Battery, and I picked up Essence Surge here. So that's 4 points there, compared to the 3 points if you don't include the life nodes there. So I picked up Essence Surge, which is faster start of Energy Shield delay. My purpose was to test whether the recharge style of Eldritch Battery build would be useful for leveling. And it just isn't. Like, when packs are separated out, when you kill a pack, you have like maybe a 2-second delay or 1.5 second delay before your energy shield starts regenerating. It's not too bad, it's somewhat manageable, but the recharge rate is also quite low. And if you're in any sort of prolonged combat, if you're fighting a boss, a unique, a nasty rare, or if you're just in a particularly dense zone, your energy shield will never recharge. You end up going to mana, you end up using your mana, you end up relying on a mana flask, and your energy shield never recharges. It's just useless for leveling. So that might not be that big a deal. Maybe it's just an endgame keystone yet. I'll let you guys know once I actually test Eldritch Battery, but I just wanted to give you my first impressions based on it for leveling, not useful at all for leveling. The next thing I want to give my first impressions on is jewels, the addition of jewels to the game. So if you guys were not aware, there have been a bunch of jewel sockets added to the passive tree. These are empty passives that don't give anything, but when you allocate them, you're able to place an actual item into them. You can open your inventory in the passive tree now, and you can actually socket a jewel into this spot. Now you can change these as freely as you want, as long as you have that passive allocated. So if I want to instead put this one in here, I can instead put this one in here, so I can switch them out as freely as I want whenever I want to change up my build. Awesome mechanic, awesome extra layer of customization, and the variety of mods that you can get on these is pretty interesting. There's a lot of unique modifiers, a lot of stuff that you would usually see on notables, and some of the uniques I've seen so far are pretty interesting. This one, for example, minions recover 4% of the maximum life when they block. Pretty interesting jewel right there. Here's some other ones here. Here's just a blue that I picked up that I thought was kind of nice. 2% additional chance to block spells while dual wielding, and 7% increased global crit strike chance. You can get some pretty interesting stats on this. I've also seen things like energy shield on hit. There's actually some build enabling things you can do with these jewels. I think it's difficult to roll a good jewel. When you alch a jewel, you get 4 properties, and there's a lot of properties that you can get on each type of jewel. The actual properties that you can get are themed towards the color, so green is dexterity, blue is intelligence, and red is strength, and they kind of have a rough theming based on the actual things that can roll. But there's a huge number of different properties for jewels, and there's a lot of things that wouldn't necessarily go well together. Like you can get staff damage and mind damage and bow damage probably on the same thing. Like you get some pretty weird mixtures. Like what have I got here? I've got chance to block mind damage, cast speed while holding a staff, and life and mana. The life and mana is a single affix. Cast speed with fire skills, increased chaos damage, increased crit multiplier with cold skills, and cast speed for curses. I think the best way to craft gems is probably going to be to alteration spam them for 2 good things and then regal them for something else, since when you regal it, you're only missing 1 affix, since there's a maximum of 4 affixes, but when you alch, you're missing 2 affixes, you're getting 2 affixes less value from your alch, and the chaotic nature of these gems is that, or these jewels, is that your chances of you getting something that's fully useful, like all of the mods are good, is pretty low. So pretty nice change. There's going to be a lot of kind of cool searching for jewels and trading of really specific jewels for really specific builds. Like you might get a series of affixes that seem completely useless to one person, but are just perfect for you, just amazing. Someone linked a jewel in chat yesterday and they're like, ugh, terrible. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my god, that's like a perfect crit staff jewel right there. That's insane. So there's going to be some really interesting stuff in jewels. Overall, I really like this system. It's been really interesting exploring the jewel system. The other cool thing I want to note is that corrupting jewels, Vial Orbs are probably going to go up in price a bit because corrupting jewels is actually pretty damn important. You do get implicits. I've seen some different implicits available on the jewels, but you can also only get some unique jewels by vialing jewels. There are, I don't know how many, but there's actually a pretty good number of jewels that are only available by vialing. Some of those have pretty interesting affixes, and some of them have drawbacks as well to go with those affixes. So there's some pretty interesting things out there to get only by vialing. So jewel science is in full force. So finally, since it's been asked a lot, I just wanted to give a quick mention to the desync changes and to loot filters. Loot filters, I believe, are in the beta, but I haven't tested them yet. I'm going to be testing them on my live stream today, so you can pop by if you want to see how that's going and see if they're working. Hopefully they're working. And the other thing is the desync changes. A lot of people stop by and ask, how's the new desync and stuff like that. That hasn't been implemented yet. I just wanted to let you guys know that. That's going to be implemented in about 2 to 3 weeks, I believe, and that's the deterministic lockstep mode that will be removing desync for people with low latency. So that'll be coming later. Otherwise, guys, hope you enjoyed my first impressions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below, and when I'm not streaming, I'll try and find some time to answer them. Otherwise, make sure to pop in my stream, guys. I'm going to be streaming the beta a lot. I'm having a really good time with it. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.